The air in the imperial train is thick with the smell of coal dust and cold fear. It is March 15th, 1917. The train, a mobile palace of polished mahogany and gilt, is stopped dead on its tracks near Pskov, a backwater far from the glittering capital. Inside, the Emperor of all the Russias, Tsar Nicholas II, stares out the window at the swirling, grey dusk. His face, framed by a carefully groomed beard, is a mask of weary resignation. He has been fighting a war on the outskirts of his empire, but the true battle, the one for the soul of Russia itself, has been lost in his absence. The sound of boots on gravel. Not the respectful, synchronized step of his own guards, but the heavy, purposeful tread of strangers. For men, their faces grim, their uniforms unfamiliar, board the train. They do not bow. They do not use his title. They are the emissaries of the state Duma, the very parliament he has so often ignored and dissolved. The lead man, Alexander Guchkov, his voice devoid of all warmth, does not request. He informs. The Tsar turns from the window. The opulent compartment, with its silk upholstery and family photographs, suddenly feels like a cage. He listens, his hands resting on a small table. On it lies a single sheet of paper. The words swim before his eyes. Abdication. The pen they offer him feels heavier than any scepter. For a moment, there is only the sound of his own breathing, the faint hiss of the steam engine, and the deafening silence of 3 centuries of Romanov rule coming to an end in this lonely, cold place. He picks up the pen. The nib scratches against the paper, a dry, final sound. It is the sound of an empire breaking. To understand the gravity of that scratch of the pen, one must travel back from the desolate rails of Pskov to the incandescent splendor of the Winter Palace, just a few years prior. St. Petersburg, 1913. The Romanov Dynasty is celebrating its 300th year. The city is a spectacle of imperial power. Gilded carriages clatter over cobblestones. The air is perfumed with incense from grand processions and the scent of champagne from endless balls. Nicholas and his family are the center of this universe, bathed in the light of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. But step outside the palace walls. The smell changes. It becomes the pungent odor of unwashed bodies and boiling cabbage from the cramped tenements. The sound is the constant, low grumble of discontent from the factories that line the Neva River. Russia is a colossus with feet of clay. The Tsar, a man of quiet faith and limited political imagination, rules as his father did, with absolute, autocratic certainty. He believes it is his God-given duty. To his people, he is the little father, a distant, almost mythical figure. To the growing intelligentsia and the restless masses, he is an obstacle, a relic. His personal life, too, is shadowed. His son and heir, Alexei, carries a secret curse within his royal blood, hemophilia. The slightest bump could mean a slow, painful death. This private tragedy leads the Tsarina, Alexandra, into the arms of a mysterious, filthy holy man who seems to hold the power to soothe the boy's agony. His name is Grigori Rasputin. With his piercing eyes, unkempt beard, and rumored debauchery, Rasputin becomes a dark fixture at court. The whispers begin. They say that Tsarina is his puppet, that the Tsar is weak, dominated by his wife and this mad monk. The scent of scandal mixes with the incense, and the rot at the heart of the empire deepens. Then, the world goes to war. 1914. The streets of Petersburg, now patriotically renamed Petrograd, erupt in a frenzy of support. But the Great War is a meat grinder. The Russian army, brave but ill-equipped, is sent to the front with promises of glory. They are met with the stench of mud, blood, and cordite. The sound is the relentless thunder of German artillery, the screams of men and horses dying in the frozen muck. Millions perish. For what? The news trickles back to the home front. The trains, which should carry food to the cities, are clogged with troops and munitions. In Petrograd, the winter of 1917 is brutally cold. The bread lines grow longer, the faces more gaunt. The sound of a hungry child crying in a frozen apartment is more powerful than any imperial decree. The stage is set. The actor is hungry, angry, and armed. The Romanovs, sequestered in their palace at Tsarskoye Selo, are playing a game of chess, blissfully unaware that the board is about to be set on fire. The spark ignites in late February. A bread riot. A simple, desperate act. But this time, it does not fizzle out. It spreads. Factory workers down their tools. They pour into the streets, a human river of fury. The Tsar, at military headquarters far from the capital, receives the telegrams. He dismisses them. "This is nonsense," he scribbles in the margin of a report. "I order this to stop tomorrow." He commands the garrison to fire upon the crowds. But a crucial thing happens. The soldiers, these peasant boys in uniform, look at the crowds and see their mothers, their brothers, their own hungry faces. On March 12th, the Volinsky regiment mutinies. Then another, and another. The crack of rifle fire is no longer aimed at the people, but at their officers. The sound of revolution is not just shouting. It is the clatter of rifles being handed over, the roar of armored cars flying red flags, the crumbling of brick and mortar as prisons are thrown open. The capital is no longer his. The Duma, defying his order to dissolve, forms a provisional committee. In another room, the Petrograd Soviet of Workers' and Soldiers' Deputies is born, a rival power representing the radical street. Russia now has two masters, and neither of them is the Tsar. Aboard the imperial train, Nicholas is finally shaken from his delusion. The news is no longer a nuisance. It is a tidal wave. He decides to return to Tsarskoye Selo, to his family. But the revolution controls the rails. His train is diverted, rerouted, shunted onto sidings. It becomes a ghost ship, carrying a sovereign with no kingdom, racing through a landscape that has suddenly become hostile foreign territory. The world outside his window has transformed. The stations they pass are no longer adorned with his portraits and cheering subjects. They are filled with sullen, armed men who look upon the imperial crest with contempt. The familiar rhythm of his life is gone, replaced by the terrifying, unpredictable jolts of a journey into the unknown. He is heading not towards his palace, but towards a prearranged, and ultimately fatal, meeting in the quiet town of Pskov, where the commander of the Northern Front, General Nikolai Rusky, awaits with the men from Petrograd. The trap is about to spring. The train lurches to a final, shuddering halt. The imperial carriage is now a prison on wheels, isolated on a spur of track, surrounded by soldiers whose loyalty has evaporated like the steam from the engine. Inside, the Tsar waits. The air is stale, thick with the scent of extinguished cigars and dread. He can hear the muffled voices of the new guards, their tone casual, disrespectful. The world has been turned upside down. General Rusky arrives first. His face is grave, his words blunt. For hours, he argues, he pleads, he practically begs the Tsar to understand the reality hurtling towards him. The army is crumbling. The capital is lost. The only hope to prevent total civil war, Rusky insists, is for the Tsar to grant a responsible government. Nicholas is immovable. His jaw is set. To share power is a betrayal of his coronation oath, a sin against God. He believes, with a faith that is both admirable and catastrophic, that the simple Russian people are still loyal, that it is only Petrograd and the politicians that have gone mad. Then, the sound of another engine. Heavier footsteps approach. The delegation from the Duma boards the train. Alexander Guchkov, a man with a hawk-like intensity, and Vasily Shulgin, pale and nervous. They do not bow. They bring not requests, but ultimatums from a new power. They lay out the situation with brutal clarity. Mutiny is spreading like wildfire along the front. The telegraph wires from his generals are burning up, not with messages of support, but with one unanimous, shocking demand: abdication. His own military high command, the very men he trusted to lead his armies, have abandoned him. They see his continued reign as a death sentence for Russia. The news is a physical blow. Nicholas sways slightly. The room seems to shrink, the gilt-framed portraits of his ancestors staring down in silent judgment. This is not the betrayal of politicians. This is the desertion of his army. The foundation of his power, the very institution he believed was unshakable, has dissolved beneath his feet. The argument lasts deep into the night. The only light comes from a single electric lamp, casting long, dancing shadows that seem to mock the solemnity of the moment. Finally, alone with his thoughts, Nicholas walks to the window. Outside, the Russian night is absolute, a vast, black emptiness. He thinks of his son, Alexei, the frail boy who bleeds from a whisper. He thinks of the weight of the crown, a weight that could crush the child. He thinks of the war, the millions dead, the chaos. A terrible, suffocating certainty settles over him. He is not just losing his throne, he is holding a lit fuse connected to a powder keg that is all of Russia. His duty, he finally concedes, is not to fight for a crown, but to prevent a bloodbath. The decision is made. He will abdicate. But in a final, heartbreaking twist of Romanov destiny, he cannot bear to pass this cursed inheritance to his sickly son. He will sign it all away. The 300-year dynasty will end, not with a bang, but with the scratch of a pen on a simple piece of railway telegraph paper. He turns back to the room. His face is ashen, but calm. "I have decided," he says, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I shall renounce the throne." The words hang in the air, sucking all the sound from the compartment. Gutchkov hands in the draft act of abdication. Nicholas reads it, then asks for a pen. The instrument is produced. An ordinary pen. There is no ceremony, no fanfare, just the soft rustle of paper and the definitive scratch of ink. He signs twice, Nicholas. It is done. The date is March 2nd, 1917, by the old Russian calendar. In a single, swift stroke, the autocracy of all the Russias ceases to exist. He does not abdicate in favor of his son, but for his brother, the Grand Duke Michael. It is a last, desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable, to provide a semblance of continuity. It is a futile gesture. The abdication document is not a political maneuver. It is an obituary for an era. The delegates take the paper. They do not celebrate. They simply leave, carrying the fragile scrap that has just rewritten history. The train carriage is silent once more. Nicholas is now Citizen Romanov. The title he held since birth is gone. He walks to the small table where a family photograph stands. He picks it up, his fingers tracing the faces of his wife and children. The world outside the window is the same, yet it is utterly, irrevocably changed. He has given up everything to save his country, but he has just signed his own death warrant and that of his family. The forced abdication is complete, but the true horror is only beginning. The silence in the wake of their departure is profound. It is not a peaceful quiet, but a heavy, suffocating void where the very concept of empire used to reside. Nicholas remains seated, staring at the grain of the wooden table. The pen lies where he dropped it. A small, dark blot of ink stains the polished surface, a permanent mark of impermanence. He can hear the delegate's footsteps receding, the crunch of gravel, the slam of a carriage door. A train whistle blows in the distance, but it is not for him. Nothing is for him anymore. He is taken to the governor's house in Pskov. The room they give him is comfortable, but it is a cage nonetheless. The guards outside his door are no longer his protectors. They are his jailers, their eyes wary, their allegiance transferred to a ghostly new authority in Petrograd. He picks up a telegram form, his movements automatic. He must tell Alexandra. How does one put such a cataclysm into words? "I have abdicated," he writes. The simplicity of the phrase is monstrous. He speaks of his health, of the treachery and cowardice that surrounded him. But the core of the message is a vast, unspoken grief. He has not just lost a crown, he has broken a sacred trust passed down through generations. In Petrograd, the news is met not with mourning, but with a frenzied, chaotic euphoria. Crowds surge through the streets, their cheers a stark contrast to the funereal silence in Pskov. They topple the giant bronze statue of Alexander III, the Tsar's own father. The sound of metal hitting cobblestone is a thunderclap of finality. The double-headed eagles, the symbol of Romanov power for centuries, are pried from buildings and smashed in the streets. The air smells of snow, smoke, and a strange, intoxicating sense of liberation. The empire is being physically erased, one symbol at a time. But the new masters of Russia are already at each other's throats. The provisional government, composed of liberal politicians, now holds the paper of abdication. They believe they can steer Russia into a modern, democratic future, continuing the war against Germany. Across the city, in the smoky, crowded Tauride Palace, the Petrograd Soviet holds the real power, the loyalty of the soldiers and the workers. They issue their own commands, their Order No. 1, which gut military discipline and place ultimate authority in their own hands. Russia is a cart being pulled by two different horses, racing towards a cliff. The Grand Duke Michael, upon whom Nicholas had bestowed the crown, takes one look at the seething chaos in Petrograd and, after a single day of deliberation, refuses the throne. The Romanov Dynasty, which began with a young Michael Romanov in 1613, ends with another Michael's signature 304 years later. The abdication, intended as a surgical amputation to save the body politic, has become a decapitation. There is no Tsar. There is no clear successor. There is only a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. For Nicholas and his family, now reunited at the Alexander Palace at Tsarskoye Selo, the world has shrunk to the dimensions of their home. The Grand Palace becomes their gilded prison. The parks and gardens they once strolled through are now patrolled by suspicious, often hostile guards. The scent of spring flowers is tainted by the ever-present smell of cigarette smoke from the soldiers lounging on the parquet floors. The sounds are different now. The clatter of rifle bolts being worked, the rough laughter of men who do not lower their voices in their presence, the constant, low hum of a world moving on without them. They try to create a semblance of normalcy. Nicholas chops wood in the garden, the steady thud of the axe a rhythm he can control in a world of chaos. Alexandra, her health frail, spends her days in a wheelchair, her face a mask of stoic suffering. The children, confused and isolated, play games behind closed curtains. They are ghosts in their own home, living in a strange, suspended animation. They are no longer rulers, but they are not yet prisoners. They are assets, pawns in a deadly political game. The provisional government, under Alexander Kerensky, debates their fate. Should they be sent into exile? To Britain, to their cousin King George V? The request is made. But in London, the political winds are cold. The British government, fearing the spread of revolutionary fervour, quietly withdraws the offer. The Romanovs are now stateless, trapped. The summer of 1917 passes in a fever dream for Russia. The provisional government's disastrous summer offensive collapses. The German army advances. Lenin and the Bolsheviks, once a fringe group, gather strength in the shadows, their message of peace, land, and bread a siren song to a nation exhausted by war and hunger. The noose is tightening. For the Romanovs, the fragile stability of Tsarskoye Selo is about to be shattered. The revolution is entering a new, more radical, and more violent phase. And the family in the Alexander Palace is its most potent and vulnerable symbol. The first true chill of autumn, 1917, bites at the air in Tsarskoye Selo. It seeps through the sealed windows of the Alexander Palace, a cold that has little to do with the weather. It is the chill of their fading relevance, of a world forgetting them. The guards have grown rougher, their manners coarser. The family's world, once measured in empires, has been reduced to the view from a single window. They are exhibits in a museum of their own former lives. Then, the sound of new engines. Not the familiar purr of loyalists' cars, but the ragged roar of trucks. A new contingent of soldiers arrives. Their uniforms are a motley collection, their faces hard, their eyes burning with a new kind of fervour. They are not the ambivalent guards of the provisional government. These are Red Guards, men whose loyalty is to the Petrograd Soviet, to the radical Bolshevik faction that is rapidly seizing the levers of power from the weakening Kerensky. The atmosphere shifts instantly. The latent hostility becomes overt, threatening. The commander of this new guard, a man named Kozyrev, marches into the palace without ceremony. He does not look at the Tsar, he looks through him. He announces they are being moved. "For your own safety," he says, the words a transparent lie. Panic, cold and sharp, flashes in Alexandra's eyes. The children cluster closer. Nicholas remains stoic, his face a carefully maintained mask. "We are ready to go," is all he says. The pretense of a dignified confinement is over. They are given 1 hour to pack. The scene is one of surreal, heartbreaking chaos. Servants, their faces streaked with tears, hurriedly help them stuff jewels into corsets, stitch diamonds into the linings of clothes. They are preparing for an exile they now fear will never come. The air is thick with the smell of mothballs from old trunks and the sharp, metallic scent of fear. They are not packing for a journey. They are burying their past. The train ride that follows is a nightmare echo of the one to Pskov. But this time, there is no imperial carriage. They are shoved into a cramped, filthy third-class compartment. The smells are of sweat, stale tobacco, and unwashed bodies. The sounds are the raucous, jeering voices of their guards, who make a point of smoking, spitting, and playing cards on the very beds where the Grand Duchesses try to rest. The girls huddle together, their world of lace and protocol violently colliding with the brutal reality of revolution. They are being stripped not just of their titles, but of their very humanity. Their destination is Tobolsk, a remote Siberian town chosen for its isolation. The governor's house there becomes their new prison. It is smaller, colder, meaner. The winter is a physical assault. The wind howls across the vast, empty plains, a constant, mournful dirge. Frost paints intricate, cruel patterns on the inside of the windows. They are cut off from the world, their only news the heavily censored rumors brought by guards who delight in tormenting them with tales of the empire's collapse. Nicholas reads aloud to the family, his voice a steady, calming drone against the rising storm outside. He tends a small garden when the thaw comes, a pathetic imitation of his former vast estates. They are waiting. But for what? The answer comes from the outside world, carried on wires crackling with violence. In Petrograd, the Bolsheviks have made their move. The storming of the Winter Palace. The crack of rifle fire in the streets. The provisional government has fallen. Lenin is in charge. The new regime is not interested in debate or exile. Their language is the language of class war, of eradication. The Romanovs are not just political opponents. They are a symbol of everything that must be purged. The change in their conditions is immediate and severe. The relatively lax guards from Tobolsk are replaced by a hand-picked squad of hardline Bolsheviks from the Ural Soviet, a group known for its ruthlessness. The new commandant, a man named Yakovlev, is an enigma. He is cold, efficient, but there is a flicker of something else in his eyes, not ideological fury, but a grim sense of duty. He receives a coded telegram. His orders are to move the Tsar. Alone. The family is thrown into despair. Separation is a terror worse than execution. They beg, they plead. Nicholas refuses to go. Alexandra, rising from her wheelchair in a surge of maternal fury, declares she will not let them take him. 4 days, a tense standoff grips the house. The air is electric with impending doom. Then, Yakovlev, after a series of frantic, secret communications, changes the plan. He will take them all. The relief is temporary, a fleeting calm in the eye of a hurricane. They do not know that Yakovlev is acting on his own initiative, that he may be trying to save them, spiriting them away from the more radical Ural Soviet to a location under Moscow's control. The journey is a confused, desperate trek across the spring-thawed Siberian landscape. The mud is so deep it swallows the carriage wheels. They are constantly lost, constantly watched. Yakovlev seems to be racing against an unseen clock, but his plan fails. He is intercepted. The Ural Soviet, led by a man named Alexander Beloborodov, reasserts its authority. The orders are countermanded. The family's destination is no longer Moscow. It is a city called Ekaterinburg, the heart of the Bolsheviks' power in the Urals. A city that hates them. They are taken to a large, 2-story house, sealed off from the street by a tall, wooden palisade. It belonged once to a merchant named Ipatiev. The locals have already given it a new name, the House of Special Purpose. The name is a masterpiece of bureaucratic euphemism, hiding a terrible truth. The windows of their new prison are painted white, sealing them off from the sun, from the world, from hope. They are placed under the command of a new jailer, a man named Avdeyev, a drunkard who allows his men to steal their food and mock them relentlessly. The final act of their tragedy is about to begin. The walls of the Ipatiev house are not just to keep them in. They are to keep the world out. The Ipatiev house was a mausoleum for the living. The air inside was thick and still, smelling of boiled cabbage, cheap tobacco, and the faint, cloying scent of old perfume from the Grand Duchesses, a ghost of their former lives. The whitewash on the windows turned the world outside into a blur of shapeless light, trapping them in a perpetual, suffocating twilight. Every sound from the street, a passing cart, a raised voice, was muffled, distant, a reminder of a life they could no longer touch. Their days fell into a grim, monotonous rhythm, dictated by the whims of their captors. The guards, handpicked for their loyalty to the Ural Soviet, were a brutal lot. They scrawled obscene drawings and verses about Alexandra and Rasputin on the walls of the outhouse. They stole their food. They played the balalaika loudly and crudely outside their door at all hours. The family's dignity was being systematically, deliberately stripped away, piece by piece. Nicholas maintained his stoic routine. He read aloud from the Bible. He sawed wood in the small, enclosed yard. The rhythmic scrape of the saw a pathetic counterpoint to the vast power he once wielded. Alexandra, her health broken, spent most of her days in a chair, her face a granite mask of suffering and faith. The children, especially the vibrant Anastasia and the ailing Alexei, tried to find pockets of joy, playing quiet games of bezique, their laughter strained and hollow. They were all waiting, but the hope of rescue, of exile, was now a dying ember. The world had forgotten them. Or worse, it had condemned them. In early July, a change occurred. The drunken commandant Avdeyev and his men were suddenly replaced. The new commandant was a different kind of man altogether. His name was Yakov Yurovsky. He was calm, efficient, and chillingly polite. He enforced strict discipline. The theft of food stopped. The obscene graffiti was painted over. For a fleeting moment, the family might have dared to hope that their conditions were improving. They were wrong. The cleanliness and order Yurovsky brought were not for their comfort. They were for control. He was preparing the stage. He was a man tasked with a grim, historical duty. The Ural Soviet, under pressure from an advancing White Army and with the tacit, if not explicit, approval of Lenin in Moscow, had made a decision. The Romanovs could not be allowed to become a rallying point. They were to be eliminated. On the night of July 16th, the air in Ekaterinburg was heavy with the threat of a storm. The family retired to their beds early. At midnight, Yurovsky awakened them. He told them there was unrest in the town, that they needed to be moved for their safety. He instructed them to get dressed and come downstairs. There was a strange, unsettling calm in his voice. They obeyed, their movements slow with sleep and confusion. Nicholas carried Alexei in his arms, the boy still weak from a recent bout of his illness. Alexandra, grimacing in pain, followed, then Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and their few remaining loyal servants, Dr. Botkin, the maid Anna Demidova, the cook Karatanov, and the footman Trupp. They were led down a narrow, dark staircase into a semi-basement room. It was a barren, square space, with a single, barred window high on the wall. Alexandra, noticing there were no chairs, asked for some. Yurovsky ordered 2 to be brought in. Nicholas sat Alexei in one. Alexandra took the other. The others stood behind them, a small, bewildered group in the center of the empty room. The electric light was harsh, casting deep shadows on their faces. A single, naked bulb hung from the ceiling. Yurovsky left the room for a moment. He returned with 11 men, their pockets bulging, their faces set. He stepped forward. In his hand was a small piece of paper. He cleared his throat. The room was utterly silent. He read the sentence aloud. In view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their attack on Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. The words did not seem to register at first. Nicholas, his face pale, turned from looking at Alexei. "What?" he said. "What?" Yurovsky did not repeat himself. He drew a revolver from his pocket. He raised it, pointed it directly at the Tsar's head, and fired. It was the signal. The room exploded in a deafening, concussive roar. The men drew their pistols and opened fire. The smell of cordite and blood filled the air instantly, sharp and metallic. The small space became a hellish echo chamber of gunshots, screams, and the sickening thud of bullets hitting flesh. Nicholas fell first, dead before he hit the floor. Alexandra had time only to make the sign of the cross before a bullet found her. The girls, it was later said, did not die easily. Years of sewing jewels into their corsets had created a crude form of body armor. Bullets ricocheted, filling the room with sparks. The killers, enraged and panicked by the unexpected resistance, switched to bayonets. The sound changed from gunfire to a wet, tearing horror. Anna Demidova, the maid, screamed and tried to shield herself with a small pillow, which was shredded before she was stabbed to death. Alexei, still seated in his chair, was shot twice in the head. When the shooting finally stopped, the room was a charnel house. The bodies lay twisted and broken on the floor, which was slick and dark with blood. The dynasty that had ruled Russia for 3 centuries was gone, extinguished in a storm of violence that lasted less than 3 minutes. The echo of the final gunshot did not fade. It was absorbed by the blood-soaked walls of the basement room, becoming a permanent part of the house's silence. For a moment, the only sounds were the ragged breathing of the killers and the slow, dripping noise from the floor. Then, Yurovsky's voice, clipped and efficient, cut through the haze of gunsmoke. The work was not finished. The bodies had to be disposed of. This was not a public execution. It was an eradication. The evidence needed to vanish. The men, their hands shaking from adrenaline and horror, began the grisly task. They wrapped the bodies in sheets taken from the beds upstairs, the white linen instantly blooming with crimson stains. They were loaded onto a waiting truck, a Fiat, its engine coughing to life in the pre-dawn stillness. The storm that had threatened finally broke, a downpour that washed the streets clean, oblivious to the atrocity it was helping to conceal. Yurovsky's plan was meticulous. The bodies were to be taken to an abandoned mine shaft in the deep woods north of the city, a place known as the Four Brothers. But the operation began to unravel. The truck got stuck in the thick, rain-soaked mud of the forest tracks. As dawn approached, panic set in. They were behind schedule. They could be discovered. A new, more brutal plan was hastily conceived. They found a clearing not far from the road. A shallow pit was dug. But this was not to be a grave. This was a pyre of acid and fire. The bodies were stripped, their clothes and personal effects burned in a separate fire, the smell of burning hair and fabric mixing with the scent of wet earth and pine. The bodies themselves were mutilated beyond recognition with axes and sulfuric acid, the chemical stench searing the lungs of the executioners. The goal was to make identification impossible. The Romanovs were to be transformed from people into a historical mystery. The butchery was botched, rushed. Some of the smaller bodies, those of Alexei and one of the Grand Duchesses, were not completely consumed. In their haste and growing terror, the men buried what remained in 2 separate, unmarked sites in the boggy ground, covering the shallow pits with sleepers from a nearby railway track. They then drove the truck back and forth over the area, churning the earth into a morass of mud, ash, and bone, a perfect camouflage for their crime. By the time they returned to Ekaterinburg, the city was waking up. The House of Special Purpose stood silent, its secret buried in the Koptyaki forest. The official announcement from the Ural Soviet was a masterpiece of cold deception. It stated that Nicholas Romanov had been executed due to the approaching White armies, but that his family had been evacuated to a safe place. The lie was thin, but it held for a time. When the White Army finally captured Ekaterinburg weeks later, they found the Ipatiev house empty, a ghostly relic. In the basement, investigators on their hands and knees scrubbed the floorboards, but the dark, rusty stains of blood persisted in the grooves of the wood. They found bullet holes in the walls and floors, plugged with putty. They found a small, diamond-studded corset hook, a tiny, glittering piece of evidence in a vast emptiness. The White investigation, led by Nikolai Sokolov, pieced together the horror from the accounts of terrified locals and the physical evidence from the mine clearing. He recovered charred bones, a severed finger, and the half-melted jewels that had deflected the bullets. He concluded, grimly, that the entire family had been annihilated. But without bodies, a sliver of doubt remained. It was this doubt that would fuel decades of speculation, fantasy, and pain. In the years that followed, the Soviet state built a fortress of silence around the event. The Ipatiev house, that dark monument, was finally demolished in 1977 on the orders of a local Communist Party chief named Boris Yeltsin, who feared it was becoming a pilgrimage site. They sought to erase the memory along with the victims. But stories, like ghosts, have a way of lingering. Whispers of survival began to circulate almost immediately. The most famous was that of Anna Anderson, who claimed to be Anastasia, her story captivating the world, a testament to the desperate human need for a happier ending, for a princess saved from the dark wood. For over 60 years, the fate of the Romanovs was one of the great, grim mysteries of the 20th century. The truth was out there, buried in a boggy Russian forest, waiting for the world to change enough to dig it up. The forced abdication in Pskov had been the first, decisive cut. The basement in Ekaterinburg was the final, brutal amputation. But the story was not over. The bones still had a tale to tell. The forest never gave up its secret easily. For decades, the Koptiaki wood stood silent, guarding its grim treasure under a carpet of pine needles and bog water. The Soviet state, built on the revolution that had consumed the Romanovs, enforced a rigid, official history. The Tsar was a tyrant, his execution a historical necessity. The details, especially concerning his family, were suppressed, distorted, or simply left as a dark, unspoken void. The world was left with the official lie of a solitary execution and a relocated family, and the tantalizing, persistent whispers of escape. Then, in 1979, two amateur sleuths, a filmmaker and a geologist, acting on a decades-old clue from the White investigator Sokolov's notes, crept into the forbidden woods. The air was thick with mosquitoes and the weight of history. Their shovels bit into the soft, peaty earth near the old Four Brothers Road. They did not have to dig deep. They found bones. A skull. They knew instantly what they had found. But this was the Soviet Union. To reveal this was to challenge a foundational myth of the state. In terror, they reburied the remains, keeping their secret for a decade, waiting for a world where the truth would not get them killed. That world arrived with the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1991, as the red hammer and sickle was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin, the official report was filed, and the excavation began in earnest. The pit yielded the skeletons of 9 individuals. The science of forensic anthropology, cold and impartial, began its work. The bones were assembled, measured, and analyzed. The evidence was stark: bullet wounds to the skulls, bayonet marks on the ribs. The age and sex of the victims were established. It was the Tsar, the Tsarina, 3 of their daughters, Olga, Tatiana, and Anastasia, and their 4 loyal servants. But the story was not complete. 2 bodies were missing: Alexei, the heir, and one of the sisters, Maria. The mystery deepened, fueling the old rumors. Had they survived? Had their bodies been destroyed completely? The scientific inquiry took a monumental leap with DNA analysis. Scientists compared the bones' mitochondrial DNA, passed unchanged through the maternal line, with a living relative of Alexandress, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. It was a perfect match. For Nicholas, they exhumed the body of his brother, Grand Duke Georgy Romanov, from the Peter and Paul fortress. Another perfect match. The identity was settled beyond any reasonable scientific doubt. The entire family had died in that basement. Yet, the absence of two bodies left a wound that would not heal. It took until 2007, after a tip from a historian who had studied Yurovsky's later, secret memoirs, for a second, smaller pit to be discovered just meters from the first. Here, in the acidic soil, they found bone fragments, teeth, and shards of pottery that had held the sulfuric acid. The DNA told the final, heartbreaking chapter. These were the remains of Alexei and Maria. The butchers, in their panicked cleanup, had separated the two most fragile bodies, attempting a more complete destruction. They had failed. The discovery ignited not just scientific closure, but a fierce and painful debate. What was to be done with these bones? The Russian Orthodox Church, a body that had itself suffered terribly under the Soviets, was deeply skeptical. They questioned the forensic evidence, pointed to the inconsistencies in the initial recovery, and raised a profound spiritual objection. To them, the Romanovs were not just historical figures. They were stratoterpsi, passion bearers, saints who had met their death with Christian humility. Their canonization in 2000 had elevated them to a sacred status. The cold, clinical certainty of science clashed with the fervent, mystical certainty of faith. In 1998, the first 9 sets of remains were given a state funeral in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the traditional burial place of the Tsars. It was a moment of profound national catharsis and contradiction. A government that was the legal successor to the Soviet Union was burying the victims of the Soviet state with imperial honors. President Boris Yeltsin stood at the ceremony, his head bowed, calling it an act of historical justice. But the church refused to officially recognize the bones as holy relics. The two missing bodies, Alexei and Maria, were interred there later, in 2015, but the shadow of doubt, for many of the faithful, remains. The debate is more than just a historical or religious argument. It is about how Russia confronts its own turbulent, bloody past. Is Nicholas II a weak tyrant who led his nation to ruin, or a martyred saint? Is the execution a necessary act of revolutionary justice or a monstrous, regicidal crime that unleashed a century of terror? There are no easy answers. The Ipatiev house is gone, but a magnificent church on the blood now stands on the spot. A place of pilgrimage where worshippers kneel not on marble but on the very ground where the bullets struck their prayers, a quiet counterpoint to the violent echoes of that night. The forced abdication that began on a train in Pskov set in motion a chain of events that would end in a dark basement, and whose echoes would reverberate for a century. The Romanovs were erased, yet they are more present in modern Russia than ever before. Their story is a ghost that refuses to be exorcised, a puzzle where every piece found reveals yet another missing fragment of the truth. The final, unsettling thought remains. We know how they died, we know where their bones lie, but we may never truly agree on what their story means, or if it is even over.